Welcome back to Podcast The Vent Core. I am Admin 1 of Any Effects. It's been over 3.5 years, coming up on 4, since the first episode. And that is, of course, not counting the, shall we say, limited edition secret cult episode, released only in a certain medium that I won't mention right now. Those who know what I'm talking about, but the episode dubbed 1.5. Much has gone down since then, and much occurs to me now, especially as it may pertain to the future. Who knows when, if, how I'll get to all of it. To a degree, this episode is mainly a way to really clear the cobwebs away, so to speak, to just kind of get back into the swing of things, at least to a degree. I wouldn't rule out making another podcast Vent Core episode after this one. Sorry. And if I do, I can't imagine it would be 3.5 more years. It would likely at least be less time than that. But I must admit that to a degree there is some trepidation going into this one. Just because I haven't really spoken to the audience in this way for some time. And of course, this time around, it's just myself. I do still interact with Windbreaker fairly often. Hang on, I need to drink water. Be prepared for a wonderful cornucopia of sounds. Anyway, I still interact with Windbreaker fairly regularly, having a hard time talking. And I've had the good fortune in recent times to even attend a few, shall we say, Windbreaker Core shows. But for now, I'm just on my own for this one. And I actually did try a few times before to make episode 2. The first time it was on my phone, and for a few possible reasons the audio didn't come out right. All things considered, perhaps I should have just released it anyway to add to the absurdity, but there were a few, I suppose, salient points I touched on for that little monologue that just seemed too important to me to leave buried under the suppressed audio. And besides that, episode 1.5 was that way and numbered that way, largely because of the technical issues, and it just seemed like it would be too perverse to take so long for episode 2, only for it to be plagued with yet more audio problems. So I tried that, it didn't work, and there were a couple more times where I tried again, but because of the trepidation I just stopped midway. This time though, I'm really going for it. So I'm a bit scared, and I've resigned myself to the fact that it may end up being a total mess. But that's reality, mate. So come out and play, or go back outside and stay inside, I mean. So, where to even begin? This will be going all around, up and down, back and forth, because there's just so much that's been going on since the first episode, of course. In fact, at this point, I wouldn't even say that podcast, the Vent Core, is specifically a marathon podcast. It'll always involve that to a degree, because it deals a lot with any effects. But to a degree, and this was the case at first, or at least was open to that case in the first place, you could always interpret the title Podcast The Vent Core as meaning a podcast in which to vent from the core. instead of being about marathon per se, especially because that opens it up more to those who may not be familiar with marathon just yet. This could be their gateway drug, so to speak. It'd be great. Well, the biggest, bigliest, most obvious thing, which I'm sure most of the people who are the audience for this podcast already know, but it does seem that there have been a few people left, including, I think, the great Aperture Grills, who actually weren't aware of my playthrough. I completed the huge playthrough, or what I would arbitrarily call the Tier 3 huge playthrough, meaning I would count Tier 1 as being the full, I think, 30-level campaign, Tier 2 being the full 256 level pack that includes the campaign, and the bigly bonus levels. And Tier 3, of course, would be the 4,352 levels that I completed. It took me close to 2 years. From about fall or winter of 2017 to fall of 2019. It was a big momentous thing that I believe transformed me, largely for the better, although I did take a several months long hiatus in the middle there. But it was a grand thing. And I think to a degree I developed a kind of skill for endurance, for perseverance, for intuition regarding games and design. And of course, midway through that, Deuce Tower generated yet more huge levels. Now at this point there are over 10,000, so I would count that as being the Tier 4 huge playthrough that I don't imagine I will get to because I have too much else at stake. But maybe someone else will do it. And this episode really is for the next episode, not for itself, huh? Well, I'm sorry, I'm becoming Neil Hamburger here. Anyway, the huge playthrough is ultimately worthwhile. But since then, I've been diversifying my inventions, as it were. I began work on the text pieces, which to a degree I'd done some work on behind the scenes on and off over the years, and some of that material has been seemingly lost to me either, but I finally came into full force about midway through 2019, but especially in 2020, continuing to this day. I'm actually working a bit on a book. Or rather, I should say, I'm working on some longer text pieces relative to those that are generally of the length of 1 to 2 Word document pages. Finishing and releasing them one by one, then, circumstances permitting, eventually compiling them into a full-fledged book. Will this be officially published? That remains to be seen. There are different ways it could be distributed. Suffice it to say that you will learn and speculate more history, philosophy, politics, etc. than you had ever before. And you'll get a deeper glimpse into the ever mysterious, wondered at concept of Lightgeist. And you may even get to hear the narration of it by Microsoft Sam. Now, have I gotten to writing anything today? No, not really. Had some strange blockage in a way. But I think that to a degree, talking like this can help. And sharing this stuff, these ideas, these possibilities, could help someone else too. Don't really have anyone to talk to currently, for the most part. So, it'll be the NEFX Total Carnage comrades, and to a degree the Marathon community, that I'll do that with. You're down for that, right? You guys are my friends, right? Anyway. Much been going on in the NEFX camp. For example, not only have I continuously released the Casio chord edit music tracks, but I've also revived the MIDI side that NEFX was founded on in a sort of surprise twist, in that it is through these primarily percussive tracks. You've heard some of that yourself. Some have described it as sounding like soundtracks to a very difficult Doom wad or the like, but that's probably just because of the sound card. But anyway, I think now that I've talked a bit more, I feel more able and willing to write. Also, be sure to check out the Total Carnage tour-throughs I've begun. Most notably of the world. Yes, the entire world, but through the prism of the map. The world map. And also some places around Boise. Through the prism of the camera. See, that's the issue. Is that I'm trying to find the prism that is PRISM, not PRISON. The prism through which to refract the light that I'm aware of, or at least whose presence I'm aware of. Because that's how I'm best able to operate, best able to share the salient, important information with all of you. So when I set up the right system, the right prism, that's how things like these expository texts are made. The musical tracks, or the Marathon Carnage, those are, I think, roughly speaking, the three main categories for now of NEFX inventions. And for that matter, what's to stop NEFX from eventually expanding to what we generally recognize as inventions, complete with the likes of blueprints, diagrams, patents, etc. Don't laugh. It could happen. It'll be along the lines of, say, the generally disregarded inventions of Sir George Sitwell, who still is behind one of my favorite quotes, which was something to the effect of, "Please do not differ from me or contradict me in any way, as it interferes with my gastric juices and prevents my sleeping at night." I really love that one. But anyway, back to Marathon, shall we? And by the way, before I get into that, I do want to mention that Every Effects, the semi-tribute band to NEFX, just released a new single today. I actually heard it in advance. I watched the video. I should have turned on the camera and done a first time ever Total Carnage listen through before I did that. But nonetheless, I am interested in doing a Total Carnage listen through of that new single, much as I did for the last one released called The Bike Geist. And this one actually seems to reference something from that video. I won't say what. That's just a bit of a spoiler. Hopefully it doesn't spoil too much. But while I'm at it, that might be a good way for me to actually get around to doing more Total Carnage listen-throughs, including for some other, shall we say, windbreaker core that I've been meaning to do that for some time. So then, back to Marathon Carnage. You might say that with this episode, I am back with the piak, because I did release, or I should say, continually update, since it's level by level, map by map, any effects net maps on simplicity.com, with of course the 7 in place of the T, simplici7y.com. I have over a dozen net maps at this point. And they make pretty heavy use of things like teleporters, crushers, conveyors, pillars, pools, etc. All arranged and recombined in pretty strategic and interesting ways to create combat situations you seldom find in Marathon. I've even had the good fortune to be able to host a couple of any effects only netmap events, including specifically for Total Carnage comrades of any effects who kind of wanted that. It's been pretty triumphant. It's definitely become its own cult. But aside from that, I've also created any effects physics files and more any effects map templates. Because you see, the any effects net maps that I've made for the most part have been based on this one template I spent a fair amount of time creating, in which I, lo and behold, made one world unit grids in Wayland. But I also went into that grid and individually textured and shaded everything. Well, to a degree I did pre-shade things in Wayland, the ceilings and floors, but otherwise I manually textured and shaded things in visual mode, that is to say in the Gassara plugin for ALF1. And then save that off and have used that as the basis for creating these net maps. They are 700 one world unit squares. Each of these maps comprised of that many squares, which is a pretty good size map in terms of the width and length in which to host, I would say, games of pretty much any player count, although I understand people have different tastes regarding that. Some people would say, for example, I think Aperture Grill said that one of the net maps he and I played together, just the two of us, was a bit too large, a bit too big for just 2 players. But it's not overkill in the way that, say, playing on Thrud with just 2 players would be, in some people's minds, a bit excessive. I don't even mind that, but you know me. So, I've been able to generate these net maps pretty efficiently. They have their own style, their own distinctive quality, their own cult aspect. And aside from that, I've created some more templates as well for people to use. So go to simplici7y.com Check out NEFX net maps. Check out NEFX physics files. Check out NEFX templates. For that matter, check out NEFX text. Check out NEFX music tracks. Check out NEFX audio text. Check out NEFX videos. You really need to be embedded into the NEFX cult as much as possible. And as time goes on, you will reach more and more of a point where you can get your entire world news from NEFX. And you can more broadly get your entire fix of truth and media from NEFX. In all seriousness, I don't expect anyone to do that. But you could, and more realistically and reasonably, you could at least up the ante, right? I mean, there's no reason you couldn't imbibe more NEFX than you already do, right? I suppose if you're listening to this already, that's a start. So, we in NEFX, such as we are, thank you. But anyway, there's still more developments happening behind the scenes, particularly in terms of development. I'm not really at liberty to say at the moment what that will entail, and by development I mean computer science, coding, things of that nature, including things relating to, let's just say programming, really. Stuff that's at least adjacent to it. At least depending on how you conceptualize it in the marathon world. Lua stuff. Those who know will remember at least one video on the NEFX channel that is something of a preview of that. It's pretty exciting stuff. As I said, it's just a matter right now of building and finding the right prisms through which to refract all the information, all the light, all the ideas. To find the right scheduling system in which to tackle it all. Because it all has to be tackled. It's not even a matter of choice per se. I mean, many of you, again, may have already noticed, but I think it's worth mentioning that other than, of course, those couple of NEFX-only netgame events, which were largely at the requests of the Total Carnage comrades, who I thank for doing that. I've been on a hiatus from playthroughs of Marathon. You might notice that the Marathon Red playthrough has been on hold for some time. It's not that I don't want to play it, it's just that I've more or less pledged to myself that I would not go back to playing Marathon in any serious capacity until I reached great enough heights with respect to creating and developing for it that I felt justified in going back. It's been too long, all things considered. Mapping is a part of that, and I do feel good about where I'm heading with mapping. There are a couple of undisclosed projects right now that I think could represent new heights for NEFX and Marathon, for that matter. I won't give them away right now, except to say that they're solo. That's all I can really say. I'm sure, of course, that some things that I will say in this episode, or I've already said, or will say in future episodes possibly, depending on the timeline of how everything happens, will end up being sort of a hint as to what will come. Or perhaps better yet, will be sort of a omen that no one will recognize as such until they actually experience the experience. And they'll look back, they'll look and they'll listen. They'll realize how it's all connected. How's this disaster episode? Pretty fat, huh? Well, it's just a matter of getting the right time together to do all these different things at once. My allotted time isn't out yet, so I will mine for more material. Or rather, I have the material kind of inchoate, but it's just a matter of finding the right way to articulate it, to kind of get it through. So, let's talk more about stuff like mapping. I've been fixating lately for some time, and I might say for a long time, on the right sort of, shall we say, building block for the best kinds of inventions. Not absolutely, of course, but this is a theoretical approach that yields a lot of gold, so to speak, at a fairly efficient rate. With things like the marathon maps, which those one world unit squares, but that's not to say that it would have to be limited to that. It could be something like triangles or hexagons, or scenery combined with liquid in such a way as to basically simulate a bouncy wall on all sides. Of course, in that case, it'd be sort of avant-garde, because each of those liquid sections would have to be pushing you in one direction. So even if you were to get pushed directly back, if you approached from the front, you might get kind of slid out in that same direction if you hit it from the side. If you're not following what I'm talking about, you'll see. Because I've made that sort of thing a building block for something. But there's stuff like the squares, or something like 16th notes in the musical tracks, which recent tracks haven't made use of that theory, but it's something being sort of brewed behind the scenes. Or something like the expository text, reflections on read sentences from a different source. Because I'll let you in on a slight secret. Not all of, but a good chunk of the NEFX texts are based off of outside texts, but not to where you would likely be able to detect which text it's being written somewhat in reaction to. But for many of these NEFX texts, I will read an outside text, and for every sentence there, write a sentence that is somewhat in response to it, that may also prompt an idea that is not in direct response to it. Or rather, that may start from that idea, which would then be related to that thing being responded to, sentence by sentence. That's one of the reasons why a lot of the NEFX text sentences tend to be long, to the point of being referred to as run-on, although that's, I think, generally based more on feeling than technical grammatical rules, or whatever those are worth. It's understandable why it would be thought of as run-on if it just feels that long or convoluted, but it's not necessarily, believe it or not. And it is very much in line with some of the, shall we say, mannerisms of, let's call it, vintage continental philosophy. But regardless, that's one possible key to decoding some of the texts. And there are little seeds, little hints dropped here and there. Might give hints. That alone might motivate some people to read further into the text, because the meaning, the import, it's very much all there. And maybe a way that one might be more able and willing to notice is if they have first approached the text with a view towards sleuthing out, so to speak, what it was based off of or in response to. Still, there are other, shall we say, concepts or building blocks being brewed behind the scenes and tested for things like the texts, or the maps, or the tracks, or further behind the scenes still, the scripts, the programming things, etc. It's just such a conundrum, because what does one do when to accomplish goal A, they have to accomplish goal B. They can't accomplish goal B without goal A. But neither can be afforded to be neglected for too long. That's one of the million-dollar questions. Because even the way that these are approached temporally, like schedule-wise, is based on building blocks. This episode right now is kind of based on a building block of time, that is. It's just a matter of getting all the units in the right order. One doesn't have to, but I think it's clear enough that it's yielded gold. Anyway, it's getting a bit far afield right now, and actually the time quota has been met. So, thank you for listening. I'm Admin1 of VinnyFX. This has been the podcast, The VinCore, episode 2. And I think there will be more in store for you in the future that goes a bit smoother. But till then, chow down on this. Thanks. Bye.